Maxwell Jacob Friedman is the top star in AEW, and none of this was a mistake. From the moment MJF wakes up in the morning, he remains in character before, during, and after the cameras roll. MJF is a consummate professional wrestler on the strength of his gimmick, but he also has the cutthroat tools to maneuver politically backstage. This has worked to his advantage while also destroying several careers in his wake. MJF is simultaneously ahead of his time and an old soul. He puts on an act as a smarmy, smart-mouthed heel, but beneath the surface, he has one of the single shrewdest minds about this business. Few people understand the inner workings of wrestling more than MJF, and he's used this knowledge to his advantage to get exactly what he wants. And anybody who stands in his way is just as likely to be standing in an unemployment line or sitting on the AEW bench. Today, we're going to talk about MJF's history of controversy with fellow talent and the real reason he always seems to come out on top. Subscribe in Swahili. MJF is a lifelong fan of pro wrestling. In addition to acting and the occasional Turkish hair transplant, it's all he's ever wanted to do in life. Since his adolescence, MJF studied past and present wrestlers from John Cena to Terry Funk, whom he just cosplayed as during the bloody and brutal AEW Texas Death main event at Revolution. More on that later. Despite his entire prime occurring before MJF's own birth, Max cites Rowdy Roddy Piper as one of his favorite wrestlers. He even named his cat after the WWE Hall of Famer. Roddy Piper was no stranger to backstage altercations, and neither is MJF, whose most famous backstage blow-up happened with one of AEW's biggest female stars. In the summer of 2024, former AEW Women's World Champion Britt Baker reportedly expressed frustration with MJF backstage. MJF's now wife Alicia Atout overheard these comments and relayed them to her husband. What happened next was subject to a lot of he said, she said. Some believe MJF confronted Britt Baker in a heated exchange that ended when Max punched a hole in the wall. MJF denies these claims.
Hey, tell me if this passes the smell test, okay, asshole? I barge into a woman's locker room, I scream in the face of an 110-pound woman, and then I physically threaten her by punching a wall in her vicinity, and I don't get suspended. Does that pass the smell test to you?
In the end, Bryan Danielson, Tony Khan, and the AEW Disciplinary Committee sided with MJF. Britt Baker was fined, suspended, and after being the Golden Girl for the formative years of AEW, Baker has been benched for close to 2 years. Baker recently commented on her AEW purgatory. When a fan clamored for a Britt Baker return, she responded, quote, "Not up to me." But MJF's altercations don't always happen behind closed doors. Sometimes they happen in the middle of a match. During a 60-minute Iron Man match against head of AEW Disciplinary Committee Bryan Danielson, MJF took a break from brawling in the crowd to pour tequila on a young fan. This all seemed like part of the act, and typical for MJF's heel character, which he plays 24/7. But if the compromised dirt sheet media is to be believed, the child was not a plant, and MJF's actions were a complete shoot. In fact, the child reportedly became so upset he was consoled by AEW Outreach and taken backstage to meet Royce Keys. You know, because he's black too. MJF commented on the incident during the fake AEW media scrum shortly after his win.
What was going through your mind throwing the drink on the kid?
Kid looked thirsty. What's the second question?
And two, Tony, will there be any type of consequences for Max?
We had a conversation before we came up here. We had a serious conversation, and I mean that, and it's not to be taken lightly. The young man, Titus, was a real pro about it, and we'll see Titus here again in AEW, and I believe Titus is actually coming to Sacramento.
You never know what to believe with MJF, who almost never breaks character, but I don't think this was a shoot for a single second. You're telling me MJF threw a drink on a black child in front of his mom and lived to tell about it? I don't want to stereotype, but if MJF even threw an ice cube at a young Alfred Konuwa in the presence of my black mama, that Iron Man match would turn into a triple threat. with no time limit, nigga. Most AEW fans are white, so they live in a fantasy world where you can violate a black woman's son and get away with it. So if this was a work, it worked like a charm in front of those clueless media cornballs. But fans aren't the only people subject to Hurricane Max. In fact, in an angle that did prove to be a work, MJF targeted his own boss, which, to be fair, is technically a fan too. In a vicious viral pipe bomb, a red-faced Friedman tore into Tony Khan. He said he wanted to be paid better. He threatened to leave AEW. Max even begged Tony to fire him before finally calling him the magic word.
I want you to fire me, you fucking mark! Fire me! Fire me!
MJF disappeared off television for months and returned at All Out. But MJF's return was overshadowed by CM Punk's biblical pipe bomb against AEW and the Elite that same night. That was definitely a shoot. MJF's return being buried in the wake of CM Punk's rage was ironic because MJF's own actions during Double or Nothing sabotaged another major moment for a former MJF associate. Wardlow started in AEW as MJF's heater. Max is a short, trash-talking heel, so a bodyguard fits his act the same way a pervert fits into the British wrestling scene. Naturally, MJF ran afoul of Wardlow, and it led to what should have been a career-defining feud. Wardlow squashed MJF at Double or Nothing in a matter of seconds, but because of all the commotion stemming from that no-show, nobody cared that Wardlow beat him. This was all part of the plan for MJF, a consummate professional wrestler who created as much noise as possible to distract from the fact that he got squashed. By that Wednesday's pipe bomb against Tony Khan, people forgot MJF even had a match, let alone lost in seconds. That's how a carny pro wrestler gets himself over while doing a job. As cutthroat as that seems, wrestling is an ugly business, and this is a mentality that keeps top stars on top. Wardlow had several start and stop pushes due to injury and ineffectiveness. After joining the Callis family, Wardlow was injured once again, and he has not recaptured the magic he had in 2022. In 2025, MJF captured magic with the strangest of bedfellows when he found himself associated with the Hurt Syndicate. For weeks, MJF tried everything from bribery to beggary. He showered the Hurt Syndicate with hoes and Corvettes, desperate to join the group and thereby get an elusive ticket to the cookout. On May 14th's Dynamite Beach Break, Bobby Lashley finally gave MJF a thumbs up, earning Maxwell his first 3 black friends at the same time. This was the most entertaining angle in AEW at the time, as is the case with most MJF angles. It's also the case with most Hurt Syndicate angles, so one would figure 2 highly entertaining acts would combine to make magic. And they did, until they didn't. MJF was promptly kicked out of the Hurt Syndicate in August. There was no feud, there was no follow-up match. He was just dropped cold. That month, the Hurt Syndicate dropped their tag titles at Forbidden Door. Then they lost to The Demand the following month at All Out. Bobby Lashley suffered a knee injury, and the Hurt Syndicate has been on the shelf for months. But backstage chatter by Dave Meltzer suggested the Hurt Syndicate legitimately did not want to work with MJF behind the scenes. Even with privileged information as AEW's head of PR, Dave Meltzer is habitually full of shit. But the pattern of people feuding with MJF behind the scenes only to disappear from television at least gives credence to the idea that Bobby Lashley and the Hurt Syndicate became another victim to MJF's backstage fuckery. As of this writing, the Hurt Syndicate has not appeared on television since November. Bobby Lashley is cleared to compete. With the lack of top babyfaces in AEW, Lashley would be a perfect opponent for MJF in the midst of a world title run where everybody's gunning for him. Hangman Adam Page was MJF's latest challenger, and the consequences of losing to Max were dire. Hangman Page challenged MJF to his signature Texas death match at AEW Revolution. On what was the greatest AEW pay-per-view ever, this was AEW's most violent match. The stipulation mandated that if Hangman lost, he would never challenge for the AEW World Championship again. Fittingly, the Hangman lost via lynching, and because of MJF, Page will presumably never be able to challenge for the AEW World title again. A world title match between Cody Rhodes and Chris Jericho had the same stipulation for Cody. MJF cost Cody that match, and Cody actually honored the stip for the rest of his run in AEW. When Cody's contract was up in 2022, he left for WWE, where he helped them get their swagger back. In the case of Hangman Adam Page, many expect AEW to break the stipulation and find some way for him to challenge for the world title again. But if they don't, and Hangman ends up leaving to compete for a real world title the same way Cody did, it would have been another stipulation where MJF influenced a wrestler to quit the company after they were barred from challenging for a world title. If this is indeed a real stip, free agency for Hangman could be a motherfucker for Tony Khan and AEW. But for MJF, that would just be another threat out of the way, similar to what many people feel happened to Trey Miguel. In January of this year, Miguel, Zachary Wentz, Desmond Xavier, and Myron Reed joined AEW as the Rascals. Promptly after the announcement, Trey Miguel's contract was pulled and he was fired. The firing stemmed from controversial posts made in 2020. Some reports suggest the firing came from WBD. But after WBD contradicted another faulty Dave Meltzer report about axing Brody King, this becomes harder to believe in hindsight. A simple Twitter algorithm reveals conspiracy theories of MJF getting Trey Miguel fired due to past issues. Trey Miguel used to date MJF's wife, Alicia Atout, and the fact that he was so quickly fired after signing with the company raised some eyebrows as to whether or not MJF used his stroke to give Miguel the Britt Baker treatment. Like everything else involving MJF, I don't know what to believe, but the fact that so many of his ops in AEW end up silenced is not a coincidence. MJF is a master manipulator of the pro wrestling business, and in any conflict, he's almost always going to get what he wants. Because if he doesn't, he'll just go to WWE and AEW will be fucked. His words and mine. And for more on why MJF will end up in WWE regardless, check out this video.